Most gardeners are stuck in a cycle they don't even realize is optional. Every season they clear beds, buy seeds again, start from scratch, and call that normal. But the truth is, if you're replanting everything every year, your system isn't optimized, it's incomplete. That constant restarting doesn't just cost time, it weakens your soil biology, disrupts root networks, and reduces long-term yields. You're resetting progress instead of compounding it. And once you understand how to build a forever garden, you stop chasing harvests and start stacking them. Now, before we go deeper, there's one small shift that made this system work much better for me. I started using a 4-liter electric composter for kitchen to turn daily food waste into stable, usable compost. The reason this matters is consistency. Most people don't feed their soil regularly enough, especially when growing perennials. This gives you a steady input of broken down organic matter without waiting months. I'll leave the exact one I use in the description if you want to check it out. But the bigger idea is this: if your soil isn't constantly improving, your forever plants won't stay productive. Now let's get into the plants that actually make this system work, and the mistakes most people make when growing them. Let's start with a plant that completely changed how I view garden structure. Asparagus is one of those crops that, really tests your patience early on, but then pays you back for years. Most gardeners avoid it because it takes time to establish, but once it does, you're harvesting for 10 to 15 years from the same bed. The mistake people make is treating it like a seasonal crop. They harvest too early, or they don't prepare the bed deeply enough. In my beds, I go at least 30 centimeters deep, heavily amended with compost, and I leave it undisturbed. No digging, no rotating. Once it's established, it becomes one of the most reliable producers in the entire system. And this leads directly into the next plant, which honestly, most people underestimate. Rhubarb looks simple, but it's one of the most resilient perennial food crops you can grow. Once it's in the ground, it keeps coming back stronger every year. But here's what most people get wrong. They starve it. Rhubarb is a heavy feeder. If your soil isn't rich and biologically active, it will survive, but it won't thrive. I've seen massive differences just by top dressing with compost twice a year. Thick stalks, faster growth, and better flavor. Now here's where things start to get more interesting. Let's talk about walking onions. These are not your typical onions. Instead of relying on seeds, they produce small bulb clusters at the top, which eventually fall over and replant themselves. But here's the part most people miss. If you let them spread naturally without managing spacing, they overcrowd fast. In my garden, I thin them every season and replant intentionally. That way I keep production high without turning the bed into a tangled mess. And once you understand that behavior, you start seeing your garden differently. You're not just growing plants, you're managing systems. Now let's shift into something most gardeners already grow, but rarely use correctly in a forever setup. Mint. Everyone knows mint spreads aggressively. Most people even warn against planting it in open soil. But that's exactly why it belongs in a permanent system if you control it. I grow mint in contained sections, sometimes even in buried containers within raised beds. This gives me all the benefits: constant harvest, strong growth, soil coverage, without it taking over everything. And here's something most people overlook. Mint actually improves the microclimate around it. It helps retain moisture and supports beneficial insects. Used correctly, it's not a problem plant, it's a tool. Now here's one that completely changes soil structure over time. Comfrey. This plant is one of the most powerful soil builders you can add to a garden. Its roots go deep, sometimes over a meter, pulling up nutrients from below and storing them in its leaves. When you cut those leaves and drop them on the soil, you're recycling nutrients directly into your system. I use it constantly as a chop and drop mulch, but there's a mistake people make here too. They plant it without thinking about placement. Once it's established, it's very hard to remove. So you need to position it where you want long-term fertility, not where you might need flexibility later. Now let's move into something that works across almost every growing system: chives. Chives are one of the easiest perennials to maintain, but they're also one of the most underutilized. They come back year after year, require minimal care, and can be divided easily to expand your garden. What I've noticed is that chives actually perform better when slightly crowded. Instead of spacing them too far apart, I let them form dense clumps. This improves moisture retention and reduces weed pressure. And here's something most gardeners don't realize. They also help deter certain pests. Not completely, but enough to make a difference when planted strategically. Now, this next plant is where many gardeners get it completely wrong. Kale. Yes, kale can actually be perennial in the right conditions, but the problem is most people treat it like an annual and, pull it out too early. If you leave certain varieties in the ground and manage them properly, cutting instead of uprooting, they can keep producing for much longer than you'd expect. I've had kale plants go well beyond a single season just by protecting the base and maintaining soil health. This is where understanding plant biology really changes everything. Now let's talk about something that works especially well in containers and hydroponics. Strawberries. Most people replant strawberries every couple of years, but you don't have to if you manage runners properly. Those runners are new plants ready to replace older ones. In my setup, I guide runners into new positions, keeping the system renewing itself. In hydroponics, this works even faster because growth is accelerated, but here's the key: you have to control density. Too many plants in one space reduces fruit size and increases disease risk. So it's not just about letting them spread, it's about directing that spread. Now here's a plant that quietly builds resilience into your system: rosemary. This isn't just a herb, it's a structural plant. Once established, it becomes drought-resistant, pest-resistant, and incredibly low maintenance. What most people get wrong is overwatering, especially in containers. Rosemary prefers slightly drier conditions. If your soil is too wet, it struggles. In my garden, I use it as a border plant. It defines space, supports pollinators, and requires almost no intervention once established. Now let's bring this all together with something that ties directly into soil health: sweet potatoes. Most people think of them as a seasonal crop, but if you leave even small tubers in the soil, they can regrow. And beyond the harvest, their vines act as living mulch, covering soil and reducing moisture loss. But here's the mistake: people harvest everything and leave nothing behind. When you start leaving part of the system intact, you reduce the need to replant entirely. And that's the shift most gardeners never make. They focus on harvesting, not sustaining. When you build a forever garden, you're not just choosing the right plants. You're creating a system where roots stay in the ground, soil stays covered, and biology keeps working year-round. You stop disturbing the system, and the system starts working for you. In my own gardens, raised beds, containers, even hydroponic setups, the biggest improvements came when I stopped resetting everything and started managing continuity. That's when yields became more consistent. That's when plants became more resilient. And that's when gardening stopped feeling like constant work and started feeling like a system that runs itself. If you're serious about growing food long term, this is where you need to go. Not more effort, better systems. Subscribe to the Living Soil Garden channel if you want more practical, experience-based strategies like this, and share this with someone who's still replanting everything every season because they're working harder than they need to. Once you understand how to build a living system, you don't just grow plants, you grow stability, resilience, and food that keeps coming back year after year.